Hey guys, thank you again for the donations coming through for William's gravestone. I want to say thank you this time to Lara Cragen, is it Cragen or Cragen? And Elizabeth Richmond. That brings us almost halfway to our goal. So I'm so excited. I'm going to keep this going during this month. And I'm going to try to get through this book as quickly as I can. So if I'm able to, I might put out a couple of chapters in a week instead of just one. We'll see if I can get to that. I'd like to start a new book for the new year, and I'll talk about that later. And I'm also working on the final documentary to fill in all the gaps and missing pieces and mysteries about her story, and especially Will and his family, which is who I descend from. Today's chapter is a really long one, so brace yourselves. It's going to cover a big event and lots of details surrounding that. It's also jumping ahead quite a bit and trying to cover a lot of ground within one chapter. I don't want to give anything away, so let's just get right to reading, and then I'm going to tell you more at the end. All right, here we go. Chapter 17. Uncle William had regained his standing in the church, which had been somewhat tarnished by his long absence in England, and he had many visitors on both church and personal business. He had been highly educated and had excellent taste. He had brought many of his books with him when he returned from England. The very sight of books excited Sarah. She thirsted for knowledge and devoured their contents whenever possible. It seemed there was no trash fiction in those days. One evening at dusk, she took a pan and said to Aunt Louisa, "Think I'll go pick those few beans while there's time, and we can have them tomorrow." She saw a well-dressed gentleman enter the gate, same one she'd noticed several times of late, visiting her uncle, but had never met him. He raised his hat as he caught sight of her, but she quickened her step and did not acknowledge his greeting. It was almost dark. She thought to herself, "I must hurry. I can't see many—" "Sarah!" came her uncle's call from the doorway. "Will you come in here, please?" She walked slowly toward the house, puzzling over what he might want. "Yes, uncle?" "I want you to meet a friend of mine who would like to meet you." "I must wash my hands first." "All right, but be quick about it." What can he want? She puzzled to herself as she walked into the living room clad in her plainest Mother Hubbard house dress. She was wearing her hair in a smooth, round bob on the top of her head. It was cooler that way. "Sarah, this is my friend, Brother Whitaker. He wants to marry you. He wants to marry you." She dropped her half-extended hand and spoke in a low, distinct voice. "I don't want to marry anyone, thank you," addressing them both. "Sit down, Sarah." It was almost a command from her uncle. She had already turned to go. She hesitated, slowly lifted her eyes to look directly into the man's face. They were all three standing. She noted that he was somewhat taller than her uncle. She studied the face of the stranger as he looked back at her. He had a very disarming smile, and there was a soft, musical tone to his voice. "Please, Sarah, won't you sit down? I wish only to talk with you. Your uncle startled you by stating my hopes so bluntly. Truly, I am no ogre. Perhaps you don't know me, but I've seen you a number of times, and have truly fallen in love with you long before you knew I existed." "I've heard that before," came from her trembling lips without sitting, still looking at him and adding bluntly, "Besides, you're old enough to be my father. And besides, I will never marry in polygamy. How many wives do you have?" "None. Though I was married in Tahiti 5 years ago, my wife died there. I remarried a year later, but when I joined the church, my wife left me. That was while I was in California, working for Brother Charles C. Rich. It was he who converted me to Mormonism, and I have been in his employ since. Now, won't you sit down and just talk to me for a few minutes?" "Not tonight, sir. I don't want to encourage you. I meant it when I said I didn't want to marry anyone. I loved my husband. I don't know you, much less love you." And she turned and walked from the room before her uncle could stop her, and up the stairs to her room, undressed and went to bed. She knew her uncle was very put out with her, but she didn't care. Next morning at breakfast, he handed her a letter. "This came yesterday, but I forgot to give it to you. It came Pony Express. Looks like it's been a couple of months getting here. Thanks." She took the letter and put it into her dress pocket without another word. She carried it around with her for several days unopened. She had regained her robust health and was content with life there with her uncle. He was kind in his own way, but she felt that he treated her as a child, not as a grown-up. This she inwardly resented. Time after time, older men had asked to marry her, but they had asked her uncle, not her. Up until now, he had turned them away. "I don't want you married into polygamy, neither did your father. It's all right for them that want it, but I promised John long ago that if anything should happen to him, I'd look after you and save you from that one thing." This a week after Whittaker's visit. They had just finished supper and were still sitting at the table when she drew the unopened letter from her pocket, and to both aunt and uncle's surprise, handed it to him with, "Here, uncle, read it to me. There's no return address, but I think we all know who it's from." He carefully cut along the top edge of the envelope with his penknife and drew the letter out, looking first at the signature, exclaiming, "It's from your brother-in-law Charles, all right." And then he began to read, "Dear Sarah, no doubt some dang polygamist has married you by now, so don't expect me to come back. I may go to England. There's nothing for me in this country. Goodbye." And it was signed Charles. "P.S. No woman as beautiful as you could escape this long." Her uncle handed back the letter. She took it without a word, and rising, walked to the stove, lifted the lid, and dropped it onto the glowing ashes, replacing the lid as the flames licked it up. She turned toward the stairs with a quiet "good night" and disappeared. Hot tears were streaming down her cheeks. They must not see her cry. Throwing herself onto the bed, she sobbed into her pillow. How could he do this to me? As pride and anger fought for supremacy within her. She would not admit, even to herself, at first, that she had hoped for his return. Now that the 2 years had elapsed, "It's best as it is," she told herself. "He's not like Will, only in looks. He's proved that once and for all. I wouldn't have him now, if he came back and begged me. I'm well rid of him." Finally, she dried her eyes, crept noiselessly down the stairs, and bathed her face in cold water, smoothed her hair and dress, and re-entered the dining room to clear the table. Not until the next day was the subject reopened by Uncle William. "One good thing about it. That's one suitor you can strike off your list, my dear." "Oh, Uncle, I have no suitors, and I want none, ever again. I just want to live here with you and Aunt Louisa and little Will." "You forget Brother Whittaker, and he's asked to come again this evening to see you." "I don't want to see him. Please tell him that." "Now look here, Sarah. Sooner or later you've got to come down off your high horse and be sensible. Your aunt and I only want what's best for you. Let's see, how old are you by now?" 18. My next birthday, I'll be 19. "Actually, your whole life's ahead of you. Surely you don't expect me to keep you the rest of my life now, do you?" He said this deliberately, knowing what her reaction would be. Up flew her head in a gesture of mingled anger and pride. "I thought I was earning my board and keep here. But since that's the way you feel, you may tell your friend he can call on me this evening, and if he wants me, I'll marry him." "That's the best decision you've ever made in your life. You may not realize it now, but I know men, and I read character very well. Brother Whittaker is a fine gentleman, honest to the core, exceptionally well educated. He will make you a kind and good husband." She made no answer. He rose and walked into the front room. "He only wants what's best for you, Sarah dear," consoled Aunt Louisa. "Honestly, if or when you leave us, I don't know how we'll ever manage. Yes, you've more than earned your keep here, and he knows it too. He said what he did on purpose, feeling you could never find a more kind and good man. Not ever. He has known him for some time and is greatly impressed with his excellent character. I like him too. He will make you a good husband. Of that I'm sure. We're the ones who will suffer by losing you. I want you to know that I love you as if you were indeed my own daughter, the one I never had but so wanted. Thank you, Auntie. I love you too. You've always been so good to me. She returned to her room, redid her hair, changed her dress, and sat down by the cradle of her baby. He was a good child, very little trouble actually. I hope what I'm about to do is the best for him and me, she breathed, smoothing back his auburn hair and kissing his forehead. Presently she heard the footsteps of their visitor through her open window, then her uncle's voice. Sarah, your visitor has arrived. Within, she was a tumult of emotions, but she put on a mask of calmness she did not feel and descended to the stairs. Both men were standing as she stood in the doorway. Whitaker advanced to meet her. I'm so glad you will see me, Sarah, as he bowed politely. Won't you sit down so we can talk? As Uncle William disappeared into the kitchen, closing the door behind him, Whitaker placed a chair for her and she sank into it. Wonder, he added, if you know how beautiful you are. There was an unmistakable ring of sincerity in his voice that faintly touched her. She raised her eyes and scanned each feature. He was, or had been, she decided, rather a fine-looking man with blue-gray eyes, which had a way of changing color. She noted tiny flecks of brown in them and green, as well as blue in the iris. Strangely, she wondered what color they would be were he to be angry. Somehow, he put her in mind of her father. But she must not think of that. Would he be kind to little Will? He brought the other chair and placed it directly in front of her. May I sit down? Of course, as she hitched her own chair back several inches. Are you afraid of me? No, not afraid, but I don't know you. Let's get acquainted then. Ask me anything you like. I'll answer as best I can. Have you ever been married in polygamy? No, nor am I contemplating any such move. Your uncle has told me how you dread being a polygamist wife. If I can make you happy and make you love me, I'll never want any other woman. That I promise you. I don't love you now, and I can't promise that I ever will. But if I marry you, I will do my best to make you a good wife. She spoke barely above a whisper, but he caught every word. I'll be so good to you and that boy of yours that you can't help but love me. He reached for her hand, took it, and pressed it between his two palms. I want your love more than you can possibly know. But for now, wear my name, honor it, and your happiness will always be first in my heart. I want you to be happy. I will make a good home for you. And now, shall we settle on a date for our wedding? The man I work for, Brother Charles C. Rich, owns property in a little place about 12 miles from here called Centerville. He told me of a cabin that's for rent. It has enough ground on it for a garden. We could live there until I get the land deal settled I'm working on to buy in Centerville. So the sooner the better, though I don't wish to rush you. My uncle hinted that he was tired of keeping me, so we can be married day after tomorrow if you wish. This is Wednesday. How would Friday suit you? He was on his feet, spry as any youth of 20, picked her up and held her in an embrace that left her breathless. Friday it is, he exclaimed, as he bent and kissed her on the lips with a fervency that stirred but did not arouse her. There was no spark of love awakened within her. I love you enough for the both of us, he cried, and I will make you happy. You'll never be sorry, I promise you on my word of honor. I was never one for puppy love anyway. Come, she said, we'll tell Uncle and Auntie. So soon? Gasped her uncle. There were tears in Aunt Louisa's eyes. Uncle William continued, We will give you a real wedding feast, and it shall be held right here. You may invite as many as you wish. I'll pay for it. He put his hand into his pocket and drew out a $5 gold piece. Here, go out tomorrow and buy what you wish for the wedding supper, taking her hand as she hesitated and pressing the money into it. Use it all. I want you to have it. Next morning, she rose at dawn and cleaned the house from top to bottom, polishing windows, furniture, dusting, rearranging curtains, etc. Right after lunch, she tied on her best sunbonnet and walked into town with a good-sized basket on her arm. She had left a list of those she wished her uncle to invite, including Mrs. Moore, Mary Alice, her own mother, the bishop, and Jonathan Simmons. As she walked through the market, she selected the vegetables, then hesitated at the meat counter. She decided to go all out and buy that hind quarter of lamb the butcher showed her. It cost over $1. There, that should do it, she said, as the butcher handed her the 7-pound roast. Uncle said we would have a feast. So be it. Just as she was rearranging her purchases to accommodate the last item, the roast, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to look into the sun-tanned face of Charles. Tall, handsome, neat as always. "Here I am, Sarah. I've come back to marry you, dang it. I find I can't live without you." And that's the truth of it. Shock, surprise, anger were all written on her countenance as she looked back at him. She found her voice at last. "You're a little too late this time, Charles. I am to be married tomorrow at noon to a better man than you. At least he'll keep his word with me. Of that I'm perfectly sure." He took her by the arm and led her almost forcibly from the store. "We can't talk here," he said, as he led her to the street. He took the basket from her, exclaiming, "This is rather heavy. What is all this, anyway?" "Give it to me. I'll carry it. It's the food for my wedding supper tomorrow evening." He deposited the basket on the ground with a thud, exclaiming, "Dang you, Sarah, you can't do this to me." "Not again. Here I've waited the full 2 years as you asked. Now you dare tell me you won't marry me? Look here, Charles. It seems to me you have a very convenient memory." As she stooped and picked up the basket. "Have you forgotten so soon the letter you wrote me?" "Well, I haven't. You ridiculed my religion, accusing me of already being married into polygamy, and announcing that you were off to England. When I wrote that, I was desperate, lonely, and depressed. Then later, I hoped the darn thing never reached you. It reached me all right, and just in time, by Pony Express, just a week ago." Again, he took the basket from her and fell into step beside her. "Well, I'm here now, and I love you, and only you. No other woman I've ever seen could hold a candle to you. Let's forget everything unpleasant, and we can go on with the wedding tomorrow. That suits me just fine. You love me, you know you do, and you don't love that other man, now do you? And by the way, how old is he?" "No, Charles, I don't love him, but I respect him. He is good, and he is honest. He will keep his word with me. That is something you have never done. I can never marry you now, even if I were not promised to another. I decided that definitely after receiving your letter. Now I'm here. I won't give you up, not again. You're not married to him, just engaged. And I'll bet he's old enough to be your father. Oh, yes. And how many wives has he already?" She was both angry and sorry for him at the same time. He was so demanding, so impulsive, so self-assured. Yes, in some ways so like Will, his voice, his stature, even his hands. Then reason took over, and she knew she could never live with him and be happy. There would be conflict, and he would know she loved Will beyond whatever feelings she could have for him. She wanted to be kind, but he read only stubbornness in her resistance. They were approaching her uncle's home. She turned to him. "I'm sorry, Charles. Truly I am. I'd invite you to the wedding, but I know you'd refuse. Still, I'd like to part friends with you." As she stretched forth her hand, but he ignored it. Instead, he handed her the basket and strode on, past her uncle's gate, without another word. "Was that Charles I saw leaving?" asked her uncle. "Yes." "Well, well, I thought he'd be across the pond by now." "So did I, but he isn't. Aren't you going to tell me what happened?" as they entered the house. "He wanted to go right on with the wedding, only he was to be the bridegroom," she answered, as she began removing the groceries from the basket. He watched her, still waiting for more details, as Aunt Louisa came in. "Sarah, dear, you're back. Looks like you've got some really nice things. I'm glad. What's that I hear about Charles?" "He found me at the market. He announced he'd come back to marry me." She went right on with her work, unwrapping the leg of lamb before them. "Oh, what a lovely roast! What did you say? That's what we want to know," from her uncle. She was tempted to tease him. "What would you say if I told you I had accepted him?" Aunt Louisa caught her breath. "Oh, Sarah, you didn't!" A smile lit up Sarah's face for an instant as her aunt continued. "You couldn't do that to Brother Whittaker." Sarah continued to smile as she noted the expression on her uncle's face. She had really caught him off guard. She enjoyed her moment of triumph, then told them all that had happened. "Sarah, dear, I have a surprise for you," exclaimed Aunt Louisa. "Come with me," as she led the way into her bedroom and pointed to a cream-colored satin dress spread out full length on the huge four-poster bed. "This was my wedding dress. I brought it with me here from England, but have never worn it, except the night of my wedding reception." She picked it up by the shoulder seams and held it up to Sarah. "There, I knew it'd fit you. I was slender and tall like you once upon a time. There, it's yours." Tears welled up into Sarah's eyes. Never had she seen such exquisite material, as the dress itself was elaborately made with handmade lace fluffed at the neck and around the fingertip sleeves. A rose had been embroidered in seed pearls with bud and stem across the front bodice. "Oh, Auntie, I can't take such an expensive dress from you. Besides, it's your wedding dress. And besides, it's white, and you know, I've been married once." "It's not white, it's off-white, cream color. Why not try it on? See if it fits. Come now, this is my gift to you, my wedding gift. You know well as I do I could never get into it now, or ever again." Dear Auntie, thought Sarah, so thoughtful, so kind, so really good. She could not refuse. The dress fit perfectly. Even the length was right. Martha and Mrs. Moore came early next morning to take over the supper preparations. At 11:45 a.m., Thomas William Whittaker arrived, immaculately dressed in a black tailored suit with white shirt and black tie. He caught his breath at the sight of Sarah as she came through the door from the stairway. He came straight toward her with outstretched arms. She looked straight into his eyes, now as blue as her own, saw there was no lust, but great love and admiration mingled with amazement. He took her two hands in his as he spoke. "Truly, Sarah, my Sarah, you are the most beautiful woman in the world, and I am so greatly blessed to have the honor of claiming you for my wife." He took her unresisting body into his arms, gently but firmly, still bearing her unblinking gaze. The thought flashed through her mind, "He is kind, and he is gentle. I can feel it and see it. I must try. I will do my best to be a good wife to him." His lips were coming down. They were upon hers. She accepted the caress, but did not give back the kiss. She noted the shadow that flitted across his face as he raised his head. "No," he said. "You do not love me, not the tiniest bit. Not yet, anyway. But I love you, enough for the both of us. And some day, God willing, you will love me too." She met his gaze and smiled ever so faintly. "Come, my dear, we must go at once to the president's office. Our appointment is for 12 noon. They looked into the kitchen as they passed, and Sarah called that they were leaving. Uncle William was waiting outside. "Now, if you two don't make a handsome couple, I never saw one. Fine rig you have there, Brother Whittaker. Beautiful horses, too. Brother Rich is furnishing the transportation for us to go to be married, and also to drive out to Centerville after the reception," as he helped Sarah into the carriage. He lifted the tether weight and placed it in the front of the carriage at their feet, then climbed in beside her and drove off. "I'm especially pleased to see you here this day, young lady, and it gives me real joy to marry you to this good man," and to both of them. "God bless you both, and bless the marriage which I am about to perform, to the end for which true marriage was instituted. For the man is not without the woman in the Lord, nor the woman without the man. Love each other, make your home a haven of peace and goodwill, so long as you both shall live. Multiply and replenish the earth, even as the Lord commanded Adam and Eve." He then proceeded to perform the sacred rites, which made them man and wife, adding, "for time and all eternity." The new husband felt a tremor pass from her hand through his own as these last words were spoken, and her hand felt cold in his warm clasp. There it was, gnawing ache within, that she did not love him, perhaps never would. Perhaps it was the words, time and eternity, that had frightened her. But as President Young said, I now pronounce you man and wife. He brushed the thought aside and gathered his bride in his arms and kissed her gently, whispering, I love you, Sarah. She raised her eyes to his and answered, I'll do my best to make you a good wife. The pressure of his arms as he released her was his answer. They left the president's office hand in hand. Have you ever been out to Centerville? He asked as he helped her back into the rig. No, I've never had any occasion to. We'd have time to drive out there and back long before the wedding supper if you'd like, he offered. I think I'd like that, but I think I should change first and tell the folks where we're going. Yes, that was my plan, if you approved. I want you to know that dress and you in it make the most beautiful picture. I wish I could paint you. Truly, I'm not trying to flatter you, just trying to express some of what I feel. There was never a lovelier bride. Of that I'm absolutely certain. My father always taught me that beauty was only skin deep, that it's the beauty of the soul that really matters. I never owned a mirror until after I was 15, and Mother gave me hers when Father bought her a larger one. Yours is an unconscious beauty. It radiates from you no matter what the attire. It comes from within as well as from without. Now please, I'm not used to such talk. I'm just me, and I never wanted to be anybody else. I'm a member of this church because my parents were converted, and because I myself love it. I was healed from total blindness back in the Isle of Man by the faith and prayers of the few members there, led by John Taylor, who I'm sure you know. I have a great testimony myself, though I have suffered much since coming here. That is a great testimony, and I'm glad you shared it with me. He changed the reins to one hand, and with the other he reached over and placed it on hers, adding, There's nothing I won't do, Sarah, to make your life a happy one from now on, for you are the most precious thing in life, next to the gospel, to me. I love the gospel too, every part of it, except for me, I know I could never live in polygamy. Have no fear, sweetheart, for I have no desires along that line myself. You are enough for me. I give you my word on that. Yes, and I thank you for it. In return, I'll do my part to make this marriage work. Well, here we are, back to Uncle William's. We'll let them know our plans. I'll change, and we'll be off. She hurried ahead of him, explained their plan, and on up the stairs. Aunt Louisa called after her, I'll fix a nice lunch for you to eat when you get there, or on your way. Uncle William met the new husband at the door, congratulated him, adding, Come with me. You must change to something more suitable for that long trip. Here, these old trousers and shirt should do nicely. Martha went to help Sarah and suggested they put into the rig some of the things they'd need that were already packed. This they did and were on their way, Sarah more radiant than they had seen her for a long time. They had packed into the buggy all of Sarah's bedding and her precious dishes, some of which had come with them from the Isle of Man, also a straight chair and her little baby rocker, the one without arms, her father had made for her mother. She watched the landscape as they rode along. Suddenly they passed the same spot of road that took off into the hills, the one Hutchings had taken that dreadful, never-to-be-forgotten day. A sudden chill shook her frame. Sarah, what startled you? You are shaking like a leaf. Are you cold? I think, she said thoughtfully, if you had taken that road back there that led eastward, I would have jumped from this rig and run for my life. Her voice shook, and there were tears she forced back, that he might not see her cry. He drew the reins in sharply, slowing the horses to a walk. Now, he said calmly but earnestly, this calls for an explanation. I want to know what frightened you and why. So, with bowed head and downcast eyes, she told him briefly what her experience had been that day. His hand tightened over her two clasped ones, as though to impart protection and comfort. What a dreadful thing to have happened to you. His words came low and gently. Now I understand so much more how and why you feel as you do. You did right to confide in me. I am your husband, your protector, not your jailer. I want you to do anything you want to do that is right. Even if I may not always agree, You're a very special person to me, and your happiness comes first in my life. Try now, my darling, to put all these thoughts that torment you from your mind and enjoy this beautiful mountain country and scenery with me. Just think, you will soon have a little house of your own, and later on I'll build you the kind of house you really want, and you can plan it yourself. She looked up at him at last, the tears still glistening in her eyes. Obeying a sudden impulse, he drew the rig to the side of the road, stopped the team, and took her in his arms in a comforting embrace. Then he released her and drove on. Finally, he said, "There are always those, men especially, who abuse their God-given privileges, just as this man did. I want you to know I am not one of those. God delivered you from his evil hands, and I believe he guided me to find you and to take care of you, to cherish you and love you forever. And I intend to do just that." She looked up at him and smiled. "Oh," he exclaimed, "that's the first time I've seen you smile. You should do it more often. It enhances your beauty as nothing else could." It was over an hour's drive to Centerville, at the rate they had traveled. They were now far into the country. He clicked the reins, urging the horses to a faster trot to make up for lost time. They drove for several miles without seeing a single house. Then, rounding a curve in the road, they could see trees and a whole village of houses, mostly cabins, others of rock. "This is the town of Bountiful," he said. "It's larger than Centerville, which is just a couple of miles farther north." Bountiful, a Book of Mormon name. How lovely. I do enjoy seeing farms and growing things. She spoke impulsively, seeming more at ease than since they had been together, much to his relief. Yet he sensed her position of feeling she was there alone with a total stranger. "Then you'll love Centerville. It has, to my way of thinking, everything one could wish for to build a home and raise much of his own food for his family. Oh, look! There are 2 cows and a horse in that pasture to the east. And see, one cow has a calf. That reminds me, you're going to be surprised to know that I have or own a cow." She turned excitedly toward him and put her hand on his wrist. It was the first time she had touched him. He willed himself to outer calmness as the warmth of her hand so unexpectedly, so spontaneously thrilled through his being. "Why, Sarah, you amaze me. Where and how on earth did you ever acquire a cow?" "It's mine, all right. I earned it the time I put in at the Sims farm before you knew me. It's a young heifer, ready to calf at any time, so Jonathan told me when I invited him to the wedding supper yesterday." "This is wonderful news. It means we can have all the milk and butter we need, even more perhaps." "Yes, and the best part is, Jonathan said he'd bring her out to us himself when I told him we were to live in Centerville. He said that would be his wedding present to us. I must build a shed to shelter her before winter comes." Then turning to his bride, he exclaimed, "Sarah, you're just one big surprise after another. I don't know what to say except that I know we're going to make a wonderful team. You are the greatest blessing that has ever come into my life." He drew the reins and turned sharply to the east on a narrow country road. "Here we are in Centerville, and the cabin is just 3 blocks east." There were houses sparsely scattered along the main road they had just left, and one on each block as they proceeded eastward, stopping at the end of the 3rd block. He dropped the tether weight and came around the rig and helped her all right, holding her close for a few seconds before releasing her, as her foot caught and she would have fallen had he not held her. "You're a real arm full of precious womanhood," he whispered. He took a key from his pocket and unlocked the door to the 1-roomed cabin and held it open for her to enter. As she hesitated, he gathered her up into his arms and carried her across the threshold. "There," he said, "this will be our first home together, but I promise you it will not be our last. I have completed arrangements with Brother Rich to occupy the land I'm buying from him. I want to work on it as soon as possible." It was a medium-sized 1-room cabin, well built, with a huge fireplace in the center on the east wall, a window on the west, and one on the south. It had a board floor. Sarah noted with joy. Many, she knew, did not. The only furniture was a plain board table and a bench with no back, the length of the table, and pushed up close against it. Do you like it? Yes, I think it's very nice. I can put my own curtains up, and we can bring what other furniture I have tomorrow. But now, let's bring in what we brought with us and eat our lunch. I'm starved, and I know you are." While she put out the lunch, he took care of the horses, watering them at the streamlet that flowed from the mountain on the east straight west, directly past the front gate. They bathed their faces at the stream. She found chicken sandwiches with fresh watercress chopped and spread between the home-baked slices of bread. There was a piece of her trial wedding cake she had baked yesterday for dessert. As they finished eating, her husband said, "I'll get the horses ready while you clean up here. Then I want to take you over and show you the piece of land I'm buying and where I'll build that house I promised." He sensed that she was feeling more at ease with him, which pleased him greatly. They drove the half-mile north on the main road, and he pointed out the land, which began at the corner of 1 block and extended 2 blocks eastward and 1 block northward. "Will all this be yours someday?" asked Sarah, much impressed. "Yes, the contract is drawn up and signed." "I'm so glad you like it." "I do. I most certainly do," she exclaimed. Their return trip was much faster than the one out. Both felt an urgency to be there in ample time for the big wedding supper and reception. As they were entering the city, Sarah turned to him and asked, "What am I to call you? I know your name is Thomas William, but I never cared much for the name Thomas or Tom for a man, and I can't call you Will, my former husband's name. To me, it's how you say it far more than what you say. Will T.W. suit you?" "Perhaps, but somehow you seem like Brother Whitaker to me. That's what Uncle always calls you." He smiled. "Rather formal, but if it suits you, use it. For the time being, at least." He stopped only long enough to let her out, then picked up his own suit and was gone. They were married on St. Patrick's Day, the 17th of March, 1858. She hurried to her home, asking Aunt Louisa if there was enough hot water for a quick bath. "Of course, my dear. You must look your best tonight of all nights. Your mother and I will help you dress and fix your hair. Mrs. Moore is overseeing the serving of the supper, and Mary Alice has little Will. She'll come and put him to bed before the guests arrive." The wedding supper was a huge success. Even President Young put in a brief appearance, along with Charles C. Rich, the groom's employer. Jonathan came with his mother. Sarah noted that she was again with child and wondered who would be there this time to help her. The thought flashed through her mind, "It can't be me. I'll be miles away in Centerville." Mary Alice was seated next to Jonathan, and they seemed to enjoy each other as they chatted easily back and forth. Then Sarah remembered that he must have seen her other times when he had taken food to her mother. Though she was 6 years his senior, she seemed about the same age to those around her. She was small, dainty, and had a sweet, innocent air about her that belied her age. "They make a real nice couple," thought Sarah, "and if they like each other, I hope it works out well for them." Phil also put in an appearance, but could stay but a short time. He congratulated Sarah and wished her a life of real happiness. Next day was one of hard work, packing and moving all that could be packed into the borrowed wagon and team from Brother Rich. Their first night together had been spent in Sarah's room at her uncle's home. As her husband closed the door behind them and they stood alone together, he spoke. "I know you are dreading this first night as my wife, Sarah, but I want you to be at ease. I do not intend to place any demands on you, not until you feel you can trust me and perhaps care for me just a little." "I guess I don't know how lucky I am," she murmured. "I want you to know how grateful I am to you for being so kind. For your sake, I wish I did love you, but I don't. Not yet, anyway. I must earn your love and your trust, and then you will come to me, and love will come into your heart. I know it will. I have been all over the world, seen many beautiful women, been married to 2 of such, but none can compare with you. You are all of them in one. All that I've ever wanted seems embodied in you. I will make you love me. I'm willing to wait if I must. Now, let me unhook your dress, and we will retire. There's a hard day ahead of us tomorrow." She had been struggling with the stubborn hooks and eyes that closed the dress up the back. He put his hand up close to the lamp chimney. After he had released the dress fastenings and blew out the light, they prepared for bed in silence. Sarah slipped out of her finery and into her nightgown and was in bed in no time. He crept in beside her, aching to reach for her, to hold her close, but all he did was to whisper, "Good night, my darling." They were up at dawn the next morning at work. It took 2 trips to get everything transferred. Whitaker had a huge trunk and a smaller one filled with his own tools and other things of value to him. By night of the first day, they were all moved and settled, but dead weary. Mary Alice kept little Will for the first week, giving them more time and freedom to work and get settled. Jonathan brought the heifer and her week-old calf the following week. It was Sarah who did the milking, thanking her stars she had learned the art at the farm. On Sunday they attended church and met the bishop and other members of the ward. Everyone seemed anxious to make them feel welcome. There was a feeling of good fellowship and of belonging that warmed their hearts. Sarah sat by a sweet-faced little woman about her own age, who turned and smiled as she offered her hand, saying, "I'm Mary Elizabeth Smith, wife of William R. Smith. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Whitaker, wife of Thomas William Whitaker. We've just moved here. We've just been married. My husband works for Charles C. Rich." "Yes," whispered Mary. "My husband told me we had new neighbors. He met your husband earlier through Brother Rich and was well impressed with him. I'm so pleased that you'll be so close. We live just 3 blocks west of you on the west side of the main highway. So we may see each other often, I hope." "Yes, I hope so too. Look, that must be your husband they're taking up to the stand, is it?" "Yes, I wondered where he disappeared to. He stopped to talk to some of the men as we came in. I'm so glad you spoke to me. I didn't know a soul here and felt rather strange. Looks like they're ready to start, so we'll talk later." Sarah was delighted with her new friend. They soon became like sisters, sharing recipes, secrets, helping each other in many ways. Each filled a great need in the other's life. Each knew how to keep a secret if asked. Thus they learned to trust each other completely. The following day, Mary brought a steaming pot of lamb stew just at lunchtime. "I thought you wouldn't have much prepared, just having moved, so I brought it for you and your husband's lunch. He went into town early this morning to return the wagon and team to Brother Rich. I don't know what time he'll be back. He hoped he could find a ride with someone coming out this way. It's so good of you to bring this lovely food. I know he'll be starved when he gets here, and I was wondering what I could feed him tonight." As she welcomed Mary, she gave her the baby rocker, and she took the straight chair as she sat down facing her guest. Little Will was asleep in his Indian cradle, which caught Mary's eye at once. "I was a widow when I married Brother Whitaker," explained Sarah. "My husband was drowned before our baby was born. That was 2 years ago. My boy is almost 2 years old now. Bless your heart, you have known great sorrow. I could see it in your eyes when we met at church. Does it show that much? It makes you more, what shall I say, womanly, dignified, more grown up. Yes, that's it. You aren't just a girl, you're a mature woman, a very beautiful one. Brother Whitaker is a very lucky man to have you for his wife. I mean that. I've heard quite a lot of good things about him. What a fine craftsman he is. A good linguist and artist, from hearing Brother Rich talk of him. He's had dinner with us a time or two when in Centerville. He usually goes to Emmeline's. That's my husband's first wife's house. I'm the third wife, and Millie is the second. We all live close, near each other, here in Centerville. You might not have noticed, but I'm in the family way." Sarah had noticed, but wanted Mary to tell her if she wished her to know. "Are you happy?" she asked, almost timidly, for fear she may be prying. She felt such floods of emotion over seeing this. Her new-found friend, a third wife in a polygamist family, that she was very uncertain of herself and of what to say. Mary looked at her with that sweet, gentle smile that seemed to radiate from within. "Oh, yes, of course I'm happy. What woman is there that's married but wouldn't want a baby?" She opened her bag and drew out a ball of fine cream-colored yarn attached to a set of fine steel knitting needles. "I'm just 4 months along, and I've learned to knit. I'm now on my second pair of baby stockings. The winters here are so cold, you know. Yes, I know. I'm so glad you do handwork. I love to do it too, when I can afford the materials. I do lace work and knitting, all sorts of handwork. My mother taught me. She's an expert with her hands, as was her mother. Lace? Oh, I must learn to do that. I'll teach you. It's beautiful on baby's things. I'll show you some I made if we ever get things unpacked. It's in my trunk. She had found her embroidery she was working on and sat down next to Mary. Did you say you live just down the street from us? My husband is building me an adobe house just 3 blocks west of here, and I can hardly wait till it's done. He says it will be before my baby's born. For now, I'm living with him and Aunt Emmeline. She is very good to me, almost like a mother, and I love her. I'm glad you are happy, Mary. I have such a dread of polygamy. I don't think I could ever live in it. Now, Sister Whittaker, don't talk like that. Sarah loved the way she talked, so fast and emphasizing each word. When she said Sister Whittaker, she ran the 2 words together and it came out stricter or stowicter. She never called Sarah anything else. Somehow she felt Sarah's seniority in age, about 4 years, merited this. Yet Sarah always called her Mary. Theirs was a perfect friendship. They loved each other from the very first, and their intimacy never waned. It was early spring when they met. They made it a practice to see each other as often as possible, not to gossip, but to enjoy each other's company. And thus their friendship grew and ripened through the years. Sarah's husband was pleased that she had found such a wonderful friend. He encouraged her to keep up their relationship. For I will be away from home perhaps a great deal of the time at work, and I want you to be happy here and not be lonely. They had been in their new home for a week when, as they retired for the night, he reached for her and drew her to him. She did not resist. He kissed her gently at first, then with greater fervency. Though there was no resistance, neither was there any response from her. "Oh, Sarah, won't you try to love me? Just a little," he pleaded. "I love you so much, and I need you. Surely you know how terribly much I want you. I am your wife, and I'm willing to fulfill the duties of a wife. I will try to learn to love you as time goes on, but I'd be lying if I said I loved you that way now, because I don't. At least you're honest about it, and that's better than pretense. That I could never stand. You are so sweet, so good, and oh, so desirable. I will never abuse you. You are so precious to me. I will make you love. Just wait and see." Her thoughts flew over each other in a sort of bedlam. I must not compare him with Will. I must try not to even think of Will. He is kind to me and so very considerate. Now I must stop feeling this way. I am married to him. He can have me this way whenever he wishes. I may even get pregnant. She willed her body to lie perfectly still as he took possession. I must be thankful that he is not lecherous, like that dreadful Hutchings. This man really loves me and is basically good, well thought of, won't marry into polygamy. I should count my blessings, not my miseries. He seems to like little Will, too, and tries to please me in every way. Uncle is right. I must climb down from my high horse and face the future as Whittaker's wife. They learned much about each other in the next few weeks. Sarah was constantly amazed at the extent of her husband's learning. He had a valuable violin, which he kept with him through his journeys since leaving home. He could also sing a good tenor and read music easily. He had been trained as an artist and had in that trunk of his materials for painting. He handled tools with ease, having grown up with them, carving, engraving, etc. He knew about fruit trees and silkworms. The bed they now had was made by him, a beautiful carved hardwood 4-poster. Like Sarah, he was never idle. If not working, he was studying, reading, figuring, drawing plans for the house of their future. He was just as amazed at her various skills, marveling at her gardening ability and cow milking, cooking, fine needlework, her knowledge of nursing. He seemed so proud of her always, and praised her every good act. She had been taught to work from early childhood, was naturally frugal without being stingy. She gathered dandelions and watercress for green salad, wild spinach, pigweeds they called them, that were delicious when cooked. On the hillside, she gathered seagull bulbs, which were delicious as well as nourishing. She had learned much about herbs and their uses from Mrs. Moore, knew how to brew tea from some and poultices from others. One night, when he had his trunk opened, he showed her his collection of brushes and paints, even a small easel and canvas. Deeper down, he uncovered some books, which caught her eye at once. "Do you actually know how to use all of these things?" she exclaimed. "Sorry, my dear, I haven't acquainted you with my early background. I was the only boy. I have 2 sisters. My mother's people were well-to-do, rich, in fact, and she saw to it that I had private tutors. She had them at our home. I did not attend public schools. I had an art teacher, a music teacher, a language teacher, and was under them for about 10 years or more, from the time I was 6 until I was going on 17. Then tragedy struck our home. My mother died at the very age of 38, quite suddenly. I was so tired of being told every move to make that I ran away from home, taking only my violin with me. I hid on my uncle's merchant ships until they were 3 days out to sea before revealing myself. But when I told them who I was, they thought I was lying. All the sailors smoked, and most of them drank heavily. When I wouldn't join in, they made me do all sorts of menial tasks. They made it so unpleasant for me, abusing me in many ways. I protested, telling them my uncle would fire them when we got home. They mocked me and had great sport, always at my expense. Then I remembered that I had my violin hidden on board, and I got it and began to play some of the songs they all knew. They were charmed and begged for more. I refused to play unless they treated me well, and they did all the rest of the time. I was at sea for 4 years. It was there I learned the carpenter and cabinet making. So, from the hardest sea duties, such as scrubbing deck, cabin boy, hoisting sails, and mending them, I graduated up to top carpenter on board ship. Those first few months were the worst of my life. I deeply regretted my rash act in running away, with no possible chance of running back. But the education I received during those 4 years, I could never have had otherwise. I have sailed around the world 3 times, kept diaries both in French and in English the whole time. I love to read, but after 4 years at sea, I had learned all there was for me, and I got tired of sea life. When the ship stopped in Tahiti, I hid out on the island until it had to sail without me. I stayed there and met a lovely native girl named Tawana. We fell in love and were married. Soon afterward, the plague struck the island. Actually, I think it was smallpox. Many of them died, my Tawana among them. But before she became ill, we had a friend who had 2 little girls. That mother got the illness too, and on her deathbed, she begged us to take her babes and care for them. We promised. Then the younger of the 2 also died. Only little Annie was left. When Tawana died, I was left with the child. I kept her. She is at present with the rich family. Someday, when we have a bigger place, we will bring her to live with us. I have also lived a while in New Zealand, where I met my second wife. She was a widow with no children. Her home was in San Francisco, where she owned a large boarding house and saloon. She made very good money there, too. I did not intend to marry her. She was quite a bit older than I, but she took a great fancy to me, got me very drunk, and when I came out of it, she showed me the marriage license, all made out with my signature on it. Not long after that, I met Brother Rich. He taught me the gospel. I became converted and baptized. I tried to convert my wife, but she would have nothing of Mormonism. Brother Rich wanted me to build a couple of houses for him. He liked my work and asked me if I would go to Utah and build 2 more. She would not come with me, and so we separated, and I came to Utah. She went again to New Zealand and there divorced me. Several years later, I learned that she had borne me a son and named him after me. I saw him once, but at the time did not realize he was mine. She admitted it later. When he was 9 years old, he died. I painted a picture of him from a photograph. I still have it. The truth is, she was very shrewd, but just before I met Brother Rich, I ran away from her and went back to England. She promptly wrote to my father, and he sent me back to her. But when I got to California, she had gone to New Zealand and intended to stay there. I investigated and found that she had found a new lover and wanted nothing more to do with me. In fact, was divorcing me. After being baptized, I was called on a 2-year mission to Tahiti. I was assigned to Brother Rich and Brother Lyman, and built houses for each of them, without pay, of course, as it was a mission I was serving. Brother Rich contracted a very serious illness there, and I nursed him through it. Thus, we became very fast friends. Are you telling me you can read and write in other languages other than English? Yes, I know French and Tahitian, as well as I do English, also Latin and some German. My music teacher was German, and thus, as the weeks slipped by, they became to know each other well, and their mutual respect increased. Sarah and Mary visited back and forth. They taught Sunday school together, attended Relief Society, and became partners in their visiting teacher duties. Sarah met Aunt Emmeline and found her to be a fine, good, intelligent woman. She also met Millie, the second wife of William R. Smith, and liked her very much also. And that's it for today's reading. I would love to hear your thoughts down below about this chapter. Is this what you were hoping for? Did you see this coming? What do you think about Sarah's choice to marry Thomas? And what do you think about Thomas Whitaker from what you know so far? And I'd love to hear your thought about Charles trying to sneak in again and marry Sarah. So we have just 2 more chapters left, and then it turns into an interview, which is interesting because she still divides up the interview into chapters. So the chapters go all the way to chapter 30. That is the last one. And it's all just bits and pieces of her life, bits and pieces of history, especially in Davis County and here in Utah, bits and pieces about other well-known members of the church at that time. Lots of her personal thoughts about various topics throughout her life. She gets brutally honest at times. So, if there's anyone out there listening to these chapters and you're related to any of the people in this book that she talks about, whether in a positive or negative way, I hope you at least glean some new information from the stories that she shares. Maybe something that will help you piece together a family history mystery or something of that nature. But I don't think at the time when she was doing this interview that she knew it was going to be made into a book that someday would be read on YouTube and would go out to the whole world. So I do give her that benefit of the doubt. Anyways, the interview does get pretty raw. She doesn't hold much back. But again, the way I look at it is she went through so much in such a short amount of time through her early years. And as you're about to find, the trials and heartaches continue. It's something she just gets used to throughout her life. So having been through a lot of hard things at such a young age, and especially throughout the rest of her life, I can see why it might have been difficult for her to sugarcoat some of those experiences and some of those feelings and opinions that she expresses in her interview. So stay tuned for all of that. Hope you enjoyed today's chapter, and I will see you next week for chapter 18.